Hello and welcome to Last Week On, the podcast where we take our favorite TV shows, movies, books, and video games and we go back through them. My name is Adam Strawn and I am joined again on this trip through The Last of Us by the one, the only, Mr. Joey Dean. How are you doing, Joey?
I'm doing well. How are you, Adam?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's funny, like normally we start these podcasts and we're like, we're good, and then we talk about the weather, so it's like low-key a weather channel as well.
We're great at small talk.
Obviously, now of us recording, like The Last of Us is over. So yeah, like I'm really looking forward
Mm,
to. We've got 2 episodes left, and then we're done, and
yeah.
it'll be really cool to talk about the finale as well next week. But yeah, no, keeping well. Started watching The Mandalorian. That's kind of filling the gap of like The Last of Us not being in my life. Do you watch The Mandalorian, Joey?
I do. I have not caught up with this season, but I do watch The Mandalorian.
Sweet.
I guess we all need our Pedro Pascal filler now.
Hmm. Yeah, and now like Ellie swapped out with Grogu, so it's
Yeah.
just we need it. We need it. Yeah. So today we are talking about episode 8 of The Last of Us. So the penultimate episode of the series
Mm,
called When We Are in Need, which obviously an interesting title, which we'll go into. But I just want to obviously before we go into the episode, just talk about the themes that obviously I picked up with the overall episode as well, and obviously compare with you, Joey. We're normally quite in sync with stuff like this. I'm guessing we're going to be the same. But there was a big issue. There was two big words that stood out for me, and these are words that have come out before as well, and they are belief and trust. And when I say belief, we're leaning into that religious allegory, and we could talk a lot about that in terms of like things that are said, literal quotes from the Bible, particular figures that stand out, names that are biblical, which we'll then go into, but also this sense of trust. And by trust, I mean the obvious one, which is Ellie's trust in David, but also as the audience who haven't played the video game, our trust in David as well. Like watching that, we meet this very nice, troubled, but very nice, very welcoming, very warm, very personal person, and how that trust slowly disappears, and how so that leans back into what Maria said, obviously in the last episode about, be careful who you trust, right? Be careful who you trust, who you put your trust in. And she gave that obviously lesson to Ellie and said, it's good, like, be careful, like, the people that you can trust. And we get that as well as the viewer watching David. We have to be careful of who we put our trust in as the viewer. But yeah, what about yourself, Joey?
I definitely see everything you're talking about, and I agree. I thought there was also a focal point on survival
Mm-hmm.
and how survival is influenced by or influences power and
Mm,
authority and some semblance of a governmental structure, because we did move from Jackson to this environment. Jackson is the ideal right
right.
now. It's working. It seems to be for the people, and they do have some access to fear. People are fearful from the outside in, but once you're there, it's more like a traditional community. Whereas this was kind of the flip side, in that it is a resort, which is
Mm,
interesting. There's
yeah.
this like idyllic idea behind it, but in reality, it's not necessarily working. And like many episodes, when we consider what would we do in the apocalypse, I wonder if this is something that is keeping them alive, this strange system, or if it is simply not working. So
Right.
survival, power, and how power and survival and a government, I don't know if that's the right word, but a government, something that's governing, a leader, how that finds place in the apocalypse.
Absolutely. And I think those three things that you said there, like survival power, they tie into the third thing, which is belief. Like how do you survive, and what you put your belief in determines how you survive. So, like these people within this resort, that interesting word used, are putting their belief in what David tells them, and that is their survival, and which is really interesting. Whereas Ellie, as a survivor, just with Joel, who always also survives, thank God, she puts her belief in Joel. and that's what keeps her going for her survival. And it's really interesting how these themes tie together like that. And I think this episode is the perfect way of showing how these themes that we've talked about kind of through this, right? Through all the way through the show, how this kind of really brings that together, kind of undercut with a religious allegory, which I think is beautifully done in this episode.
Yeah, really
Um,
good. And I also want to add that this was one of the first episodes even though I did feel a lot of symbolism and metaphor, and I felt like there were narrative points, metaphoric narrative points that were discussed, I really felt like this was one of the most prominent examples of just storytelling,
yeah, yeah.
where it was just like I took the least amount of notes
Hmm.
because I just felt like I was watching it.
Yeah,
It had
yeah.
movement, it had drive. There wasn't it wasn't as deep for me as some of the other episodes, but I mean it's The Last of Us. There is definitely depth to it nevertheless.
Absolutely. Yeah, like I felt like the notes I was taking, it was more kind of like beats of what was happening as opposed to like deep dives into stuff. We
Yeah.
can obviously talk about some of the more obvious beats, but yeah, overall, it's just a fantastic story told. And it is, as you said, a story of pure survival when you break it down to the core of it and what Ellie goes through and Joel goes through and how those two survival stories are different. But yeah, so run parallel with each other are fantastic. So yeah, let's jump straight in. So we open on this snowy town. And then we open, interestingly, on David reading from the book of Revelation, right? So he's reading to his community that he has here, all of his followers. Interesting, the book of Revelation, this is like the final book in the Bible. It talks all about like the world ending and then being reborn, battling like a three-headed dragon and all of this, and like God and like coming down, like it's like a reset. And it's very much kind of like paralleling what we've had here, right? The world has come to an end. He's talking about rebuilding society. We've seen Jackson as a form of rebuilding society as well. Really interesting that he's reading from that there. Obviously, we can lean into biblical names. David, we later find out that his right-hand man is James, played by Troy Baker, who we'll talk about later. And obviously, yeah, like the sign that he has above him, which is the name of the episode, when we are in need, and then he shall provide. And it's such a difference from, what we've seen in Jackson already, a difference from what we saw like earlier on as well, like with Kathleen, like ruling with an iron fist. This is a lot more rooted in belief. We've got like this Pastor David who is like, talking to the people that believe in him and believe in this religion. And it's so interesting where when you see those people and they're looking at him, it's so different from like, you see people when they go to church and they go in a way kind of, like learning for discovery, for like further development, right? For like further, like for, showing belief and everything like that. Whereas those people look scared when they're sitting there
Mm.
listening to David. And that's the first sign of something doesn't seem right. Like you've got the little girl, you've got the girl, sorry, crying about the loss of her father. And then even when she says like, when can we bury him? And he says like, oh, like, well, you can't dig in snow, we'll have to do it in the spring. Something just doesn't sit right within this community on the off.
Yeah, I mean, after watching the episode, we all recognize what that line actually means, that they won't be
Mm.
burying his body, because in
Yeah.
fact, they will be eating it.
Hmm.
And they there is just there is an energy here. And I think the through line between Kathleen and David is that there is a personal belief system that
Mm.
is dictating the community. Whereas with Jackson, there is a community belief system that's
Mm.
permeating decisions. And they both, we can go a bit deeper about what, how this differentiates from Kathleen, but I think there is a through line in that there is this personal perspective of one person determining what happens, why it
Right.
happens, and how it happens. And I think that is very present in the community because there is a sense of devoid community. I mean, this community is lacking community. It
Right.
is without community. It is exclusively for the leader. And they say, I've read this passage too many times, he says, which I'm
Mm.
assuming this is something he says when it's a bit of a funeral type service. They're setting this community up. They've experienced a lot of loss lately, and yet still the girl can't recite the
Mm.
lines. So there's a disconnect.
Yeah, 100%. I love what you said there about the parallels with Kathleen as well. It's like we see, I mean, from the off, we understand straight away how dangerous Kathleen is, like with that group and how they're so governed by her and just that want of revenge. Whereas here, kind of things are initially we're introduced to people that are putting their belief in somebody, but throughout the whole episode, we learn just how dangerous David is. Like, with anyone dares to question his belief or his word, he says so much with just a look. Obviously, we get the obvious one later on when he obviously backhands the girl, but just when his men question him, he just turns and looks at them, and then they kind of put their heads down. It's enough to say, "I'm the one in charge. You listen to what I say." And like that's how that character just really starts to deteriorate, especially by the end with the scenes with Ellie. Jesus, which we'll get into.
Literally, Jesus.
Like literally, yeah. I mean, wow. Um, so then, yeah, like obviously we go outside, David and Troy Baker's character James, obviously Troy Baker, the original actor, the voice actor of Joel as well. So lovely to see him included within this TV show in like such a brilliant way as well. They're talking about food supplies, and I kind of think they're talking in code here. Like when they're saying how much is left, and he's like, "Oh, we saw some deer out there earlier." It kind of feels like they're literally going deer out there earlier, because the only ever kind of food that we see them of like animals bringing in is the one that Ellie shoots earlier on, and obviously Ellie's horse later on as well. And they're talking about belief, about saying like, I feel like belief was questioned in there, and like he says, "Oh, people are just hungry." He's like, "No, no, not their belief, your belief." He needs that reassurance that you still follow me, James. Like I'm still your leader. And that's really, really interesting. Again, it's that sense of power, what you said earlier on, Joey. Like, this power that David has, he needs to reassure that he still has that. He's the one in charge, and what he says goes.
I think they're really setting up David's character to be quite a textbook narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll bring up some examples of that narcissistic reflection.
Mm-hmm.
But here we see James, he lacks belief
Yeah.
completely.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that a lot of this community's decisions are based on fear.
Right.
And although there is a belief or a lack of belief, I think, in David, I also think there is a little bit of a belief that what David's doing is keeping them alive. And
Mm.
so I think James is kind of on the fringe of letting go of that, but he's teetering. I don't think he
Right.
fully knows what he believes in, and I don't know if he knows and can discern what is right and what is wrong in this community and for this community. And we see that in
Yeah.
his response when he just says, I think he just says yeah at the very end before he turns, and it just doesn't look convincing at all.
Mm. And I think James's belief is in survival more than anything else, more in like, the belief of talking about God, and like, every time through this episode, he's talking about, let's like go and get food for people. They're hungry. Obviously, the scene later on when Ellie's knocked off her horse, he's the first one who's like, let's do it. Let's kill her because that's food right there. He's always bringing it back to the food, like of survival. And that's his belief. And that's another kind of survival string as well to this episode. Whereas obviously, David, as you said, believes in himself, like in a very narcissistic way, believing that he's going to be the savior,
Mhm.
rebuilding the world, which obviously he talks about later on when he talks about the cordyceps and everything like that. Obviously, they decide to go hunting, and we know what that means. So then we cut to Ellie, who is looking after Joel. She's giving him water. She's like pulling the blanket up. They're very, very low on food supplies, as we see her kind of putting that beef jerky down, like puts a last little chunk like on the top of Joel. And she knows like this is the point when she's like, I need to go and, scavenge. I need to go and hunt. Like I need to go and do this. So I love all of this as reference to the video game as well. Her going out to actually hunt. Obviously in the game, she has a bow and arrow. Here we have the rifle. But still, like in the game, I like that she gets the shot on the rabbit and then it picks it up, but then she knows that she obviously needs more, which is why she goes for the deer. Whereas here, she misses the shot on the rabbit, kind of keeps going and then sees the deer. And I like all the little details here. And like, it's like what Joel was trying to teach her, like in the target practicing, shoot as you're taking the breath out. And that's the control. And when she hits that deer, it's that shock when she's like, Jesus, like I hit it, and then gets up, like starts following the blood, like starts following that deer. And then this is the first meeting that we have when she meets, obviously, David and James. So they're standing there. It's a really interesting conversation they're having as well, kind of like just talking about the deer, saying, wow, like, should we bring it back? Like, we can have, venison, actual real venison for once. But this standoff is really, really crucial for the Ellie character, because this leans into power, what you were saying, Joey. And this is everything what Maria was telling her before. Do not misplace your trust. And this is like, you can be proud of Ellie in this moment because she doesn't do that. David's trying to talk to her in a very humanizing way, trying to say, like, look, we've got an encampment back there. We've got food. If you want to come back with us, like, we can help you. We can trade supplies. She's not eating any of that up. Very standoff. She says she deepens her voice as well, makes herself seem more powerful. She keeps calling James buddy boy. She has the gun pointed to them the whole time and doesn't let that drop. She even says, I'm from a large group, and she just doesn't trust them. And I think all of that learning for the Ellie character up until this point, you can be proud of her because that trust never, ever drops.
I think this is the first time we really see how much, because so much time has passed, and we haven't fully witnessed Ellie's character outside of Jackson
Right.
in this world. And if we return to the earlier episodes, we see Ellie as more impressionable, more, like you just said, maybe more trusting, a bit more naive to people and what people are capable of. And I think even at this point, she doesn't fully understand the capacity of what humans are capable of and why Joel has made the decisions that he has made. I think she admires Joel. She admires his power. She admires his strength. I don't think she quite understands fully why he killed people other than that he had to. And I think this episode, she fully gets it. She understands what people are capable of. And right before this section, we see her encounter a white rabbit, which whenever that pops up in literature, I think of Alice in Wonderland and this descent into madness, which pulls me back to the previous episode with the carnival merry-go-round and how that is also a symbol of potential descent into madness. And so we have this conclusion of this episode in which Ellie is quite mad. I mean, she's losing her connection to reality in the sake of survival. But I love how her character is just so incredibly different here. She drops her voice. Everything is meticulous. It is as Joel has taught her. And we haven't witnessed Joel teach her this, but we just know. Even reaching down to unload the guns. I mean, everything was just so smart. And for someone who maybe hasn't encountered this situation yet, she's doing what she's been told. But there's still naivety to it. I mean, the first thing I thought was, let the deer go. I know you're starving, but like find another animal. Don't encounter people. And when she's about to shoot the buck is making maybe sounds in the woods, stepping on branches. And if you listen, it sounds a lot like an infected. And it maybe is suspenseful to make the audience think that she might be encountering an infected, because that is what I thought. But it also positions that like danger is afoot, but maybe encountering infected would have been better because she encounters people who are maybe more dangerous. Yeah, I loved to see her in this. I thought it was really a really nice character change.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned as well. Like, yeah, she unloads their guns. It's exactly what Joel's taught her. They keep asking for. David keeps saying, "What's your name?" She doesn't tell them. It's like putting that barrier between them the whole time. And as you said, like I know we pointed this out before, but you look back to other episodes when, like, in Jackson, that man walks out into the road and looks hurt, and the first thing Joel says is like, "This is a trap. Put on your seatbelt." And she's like, "Should we help him?" Compare that Ellie to this Ellie now. When she meets people, she's not like, "Oh, these lovely people, we should help each other." No, she's very standoffish, very on her guard, as she should be. And it's really organic to see that learning from Ellie. So then obviously they talk about medicine, trading medicine. Like Ellie asks if they've got some, like to help cure infection. Obviously, James is then sent back by David to go and get it. So then they set up camp together because it's quite far away. So they're going to need to pass time. So they set up camp. This is a really interesting conversation as well. Again, David's trying to humanize himself with Ellie, trying to convince her. But I love this whole conversation. Ellie just sees right through to the person that he is the whole time. She just will not let him in, and rightfully so. Like when he says, "I honestly mean you no harm," and she says, "You're inviting me to your hunger club. No thanks," which I love that line. And then she says, like, "Are you their leader?" And he's, of some weird cult thing. And then David's like, "Oh, like, yes, I am." Like when the whole world, and I love, like, he talks about his belief, and she says, "The whole world ended and you still believe in that shit." Just so dismissive. And like he says, "Oh, I actually started believing after the world ended." And again, like this whole thing of like, he's like giving the backstory, like expanding the world as well, which is interesting, talking about Pittsburgh, the QZ that they had there that fell in 2017. It's a lovely bit of world building as well. And like we get that line, everything happens for a reason. But the main thing about this is, as an audience who's never played the game, who doesn't know these characters, meeting for the first time, they seem really trustworthy, really lovely. This man's going to get her medicine that she needs for Joel, all of this. But Ellie sees right through him the whole time. And we can be so proud of her for that. Like she nails it. And then we get that exploration as well. Sorry, that explanation of when he says, I sent 4 people off to a nearby town. One of them died, and then one of them says that the guy was like a brute and he was there with a girl. And the way Bella Ramsey's face changes at that point, like in Ellie, like Ellie's thinking, oh shit, like these are the guys that Joel killed, that who nearly killed Joel. These are the people that are looking for us. Oh my God.
It also shows how smart David is,
Mm-hmm.
that he knew instantly who she was.
Yeah.
He had assessed that instantly. And because on his mind, when they said go hunting, it's quite possibly for people to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
on the forefront of his mind is, okay, there's a man and a girl out here. And
Mm.
so he saw the girl, instantly thought. He thought 10 steps ahead of James. He meticulously manipulated the situation to get her into a space in which there was more coverage, or rather more opportunity for James to appear behind her. I mean, it's very thought out. I'm also like, they're so hung up that Joel killed this member of their crew, but there's very likely the member of the crew was trying to kill people to eat them. So it's just, it was just like such a hypocritical emotional response from James, who's very aware of what's going on. Yeah, I think this is also where we see the extent of, or the really beginning of the unfolding of David's character development of narcissism.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't believe until after. Okay. Well, you've revealed by the end of the episode that you actually believed in cordyceps. And I
Yeah.
think he's just seeing the opportunity to manipulate and control people.
Yeah.
And he's mastering scripture so that he can interpret it
Mm-hmm.
and become the embodiment of that Christ-like figure. Is explored in certain lines and scenes later on, but brings me definitely back to Joel in the episode 6, in which he's talking about being a shepherd
Mm.
in some form, being on a sheep farm. And that word is actually directly used later in this episode. So I thought
Yeah.
that was a nice harken back.
Yeah. And it's nice, like, it's an interesting reflection as well, like on you and I were talking before the podcast obviously started about there's a lot that's happening at the moment right now within the political space of society right now. There's a lot of stuff that's happening, and the way that religion can be taken and interpreted for meaning in certain ways can both be good and very detrimental for larger different groups of people, right? Which you and I know exactly what we're referring to here. And I think this is a really interesting parallel of that, showing how dangerous that can become, how it's almost cherry picked in a way to further inflate, in this circumstance, somebody's belief and power and their own righteousness as a narcissist, as you said. And it's interesting that to view that from current climates of the world, of how interesting we can see seeds of how things like that are happening right now. And it's really quite upsetting to see. But yeah, it's something that keeps happening, right? And I think in a lot of ways, like even people that from that kind of experience, when they see a character like David straight away, are on guard, because they recognize similar traits and similar things that have happened in their own lived experience. To see a character like that straight away, you're thinking, wow, like I can see, I've seen this before. I recognize this behavior pattern, and it ain't good. So Ellie has every right to not trust him in this circumstance, especially as well, like to go into that a little bit, but a queer character as well, choosing not to put her faith in this. I just thought it was a really interesting parallel within the modern context of what we're living through right now, right?
Yeah, it definitely goes back to the overarching theme of power and belief, and
Mm-hmm.
how power is more or less rooted in belief systems, how they're presented, how they're communicated. And to speak plainly, but to reference something that is metaphoric in this episode, the reference to sheep.
Yeah.
We see the girl who hears this scripture all the time can't recite it back. And maybe there is a inherent disconnection between the community and the theology. They aren't inherently Christian. They're not choosing maybe to be Christian. They're simply following someone for survival.
Mm.
And that survival and the power of David is being guised in a belief system that isn't inherent to the people.
Right.
And I just find it to be definitely interesting. I don't think it's sci-fi, fantasy, these genres. I think they often magnify the human condition. I don't think that
Hmm.
they distract from the human condition. I think they take tropes within the human experience and translate them into other forms and other
Yeah.
structures. And so it gives us another vantage point into things that we experience as people. And I think it is quite interesting that we are currently experiencing, and I think always have been experiencing, this kind of sheep to shepherd, belief to power friction.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a nice point that you bring up. Um, I wish it wasn't something that felt so close to home at the moment, but
I know.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
it definitely is.
Yeah. No, I just thought it was an interesting point to bring up, and you spoke about it beautifully there, Joey, like how prevalent that is, and how especially when you analyze the human condition as part of media, right? Like we see ourselves, of course, like we have fantastical sci-fi stories told, some of them, amazing, right? But when you see humans as part of that story, you are always in some way analyzing that human condition and how you see yourself within that and what you recognize as part of the human condition and how that's challenged and how that is changed as part of the experience that they go through as part of that fantastical story. And that makes great literature and that makes great storytelling, in my opinion. And that's what we got
Yeah.
here. But then, yeah, so then James comes back with the medicine. Obviously, like straight away, like he's got a gun to her. Ellie's like kind of straight up, like, oh my God, what's happening? And like David again, still he's saying, like, I can protect you. Like, you can't survive out there for long. You should just come back with us. Ellie obviously just takes the medicine and she just runs off, like straight away. Her priority right now is Joel. She gets back. I love as well, like, Ellie, she's like young. She doesn't know what she's doing. I love what she says, like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing with this, and like has that syringe kind of, it's penicillin, right? That's what she has.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like takes some in the syringe and then pushes it into his wound as well and injects it in. But then I love that this is undercut by like when she does that, rests, and then just lays her head down on Joel, like on his chest. And that's just the father-daughter relationship right there. Like it's stunning. I like literally just put like a little heart and then a little unhappy face like in my notes. But it's just a beautiful moment of how that relationship has changed. How think back to episode 1, how they were with each other. They were basically like Ellie and David right now in a way that they were just so standoffish of each other, didn't know each other, weren't particularly keen, didn't like the situation they were in. But then we've got this now where Ellie's like laying on him and sees him as this father figure. And it's a beautiful way to introduce how this ends as well. The very end of the episode, that comes back to this in a very full circle way, which is just gorgeous.
Yeah, I think the key term here is father figure.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that often is, at least in the last few episodes, I think that is the kind of Christ-like metaphor that we're exploring with the idea of the shepherd, Joel being the shepherd, being the savior, the idea of someone sacrificing themselves for the greater good. And we're seeing that on the other side, the kind of more intentionally crafted narrative of Christ like imagery side. There's this father to daughter relationship that's being explored in this episode. It begins
Mhm.
with the girl whose father dies.
Yeah.
Now we see Ellie and Joel, who are becoming more of that father daughter dynamic. And then immediately after this, and we can talk about that a little bit more, but just to skip a little bit ahead,
Yeah.
when the same girl whose father dies, when she says that both Joel and Ellie should be killed, David smacks her and he says, "You'll always have a father." And then you
Mm.
think that he's referring to Christ. And instead he says, "You will show him respect when he's speaking,"
Mm-hmm.
because he is Christ in his
Yeah.
eyes. And
Mm-hmm.
this is where that narcissist storyline starts to be a little more expanded. He has a God complex. He thinks that he is the savior. He thinks that he is special. And I think that they put this scene right after the scene with Joel and Ellie to create dichotomy
Yeah.
between what one side of a father-daughter dynamic looks like and what the other side of the father-daughter dynamic looks like. And even bringing it a little bit back to previous episode where we have the flashback, Ellie is perpetually attaching herself to these father-like potential figures, and so much so that she has this intimate connection with the military academy leader where he's talking to her so honestly and so openly. So she's perpetually attaching herself to these figures.
Mm.
So it was interesting to see her let her guard down finally with Joel to this extent, where she's genuinely afraid to lose him.
To briefly jump back, obviously, we go back to David's camp. We see people arranging food in the kitchen. They say, "What is it?" Like when the guy brings the food and he says venison, and like the way they look at each other, it's as if to say, "Okay, like is it? But is it not? But I'm not going to question any further. Let's just prepare it." Obviously, we know it's not because David and James then drag in the deer, so it's like, so it obviously wasn't venison. But then, yeah, we get that moment, obviously, as we say, when the girl, which is interesting because the girl's name is Grace. And I thought it was an interesting motif of, this biblical figure as he sees himself backhanding Grace. I thought it was such an interesting little like motif there as well within the episode. But yeah, like beautifully done as well. How then, he backhands her for speaking back, says to her, like, look, like you have a father figure, as you said there, Joey, perfectly. He's talking about himself, then helps her back up and sits her down on the chair. And I would argue that David is much more of a Lucifer figure, if ever, to put a biblical figure on him than Christ himself. Like the way he's trying to taunt Ellie, like constantly trying to give her this sense of security, taunt her away from what she knows to come and join him. Very kind of, we read about that in biblical scripture about Lucifer. But also in this as well, backhanding Grace and then helping her back into a seat as well. There's a lot of seediness of like, there's more of that intention in there, of like those sinister undertones of him. Absolutely. Especially in like that backhand. That was the moment when like, if you're not sure about David at this point, now you are, like now we've got this, they're eating people. We've got this like backhanding this girl. He's just vile. And as you said, very much a narcissist in all of the worst possible ways. I thought interesting as well is when they brought the food out and put it down on his table, he had the biggest amount of food, whereas everybody else
Yeah,
had
of
like little bits of
course.
like you notice, yeah, little
Scraps,
bits.
yeah, and he gets to
I
have
know, right?
a feast.
Right, like literally like 5 course meal set down for him. Like the meat turned on the plate to face him. But yeah, just the noise as well of when
Exactly.
they the noise as well when they're all eating. Like, they're all like scraping in the food and everything like that for me was like so jarring. I'm one of those people as well, like when I'm in the cinema, and if I hear any rattle or any slurp or anything, it goes through me. So that scene, I was just like, But it's obviously done purposefully, right? These people are starving and they're scranning that food down, munching it down, and we know by now, oh my God, they're just eating these people. It was, yeah, it's a really interesting scene, but more importantly for the power that David has and the belief he has in himself as that character. And yeah, then what happens next, Joey?
Well, actually, I love the prayer they say before we jump into that.
Oh yeah,
I just
sure,
thought
yeah.
one quick thing about them
Mm,
saying Christ the living bread, which I thought
mm,
was very interesting. Ellie is taking care of Joel. She is I'm trying to administer or see how the penicillin is working. And so she goes outside once more, sees birds move, flutter, fly away. So she is sensing danger.
I like as well, like you mentioned about the birds as well, because that was an interesting point in the last episode. If you remember, Joel fired his rifle and the birds took off in the air
Mhm.
just to see if anyone would react to the birds.
Yes.
Then Ellie, when she sees the birds take off from the tree, she straight away is like, I know what this means. And I thought it was a
Yeah.
nice callback to that episode.
She knows something is moving. She sees the five men approach, five, 6 men approach, 6 men
Mm,
approach. We have
mm-hmm.
David, we have James, and then we have four others. And she immediately grabs the horse. She grabs her gun. She hands Joel a knife,
Mm-hmm.
wakes him up, tries to. I love the way that Pedro Pascal is acting here with
Yeah.
he's just so dazed and in a dream state that he barely recognizes what's going on. The penicillin is just beginning to work. And so he's half cognitive, he's half paying attention. She gets on the horse, she leads the group away from the
Mm.
house. Unfortunately, the horse gets shot, which is
I
broke
know.
my heart. I hate seeing that, but that is something that
Hmm.
happens in The Last of Us quite often. And David instructs that she should not be killed, but James and the group are about to shoot her. And
Hmm.
David comes over, fires his gun, and essentially saves Ellie from being shot. And now this whole
Right.
time, I'm just thinking, what does this narcissistic man want with Ellie? He
Mm.
doesn't want her as food because then it wouldn't matter if she's dead. And
Right.
so he has ulterior motives, and I think we're sensing that, or at least I was sensing that. And James and another man take the horse back to camp, and Ellie is carried by David, and then three men search for Joel. I did think it was a little strange that two men were able to pull a horse, but maybe that's possible. I don't know.
Right. Especially when you're starving and you're weak, right? But
Yeah,
here we are.
yeah.
I think it's interesting as well, like when they first are walking into the camp and like, they're talking about like killing Ellie and whatnot. And like David says, well, if we leave her out here, she'll starve. We're going to take her back with us. And then James says, maybe that's God's will. And like David
Mm,
just looks at him, just stops literally in his tracks and turns and just looks at him. And without saying anything, he literally says, I speak God's will.
yeah, I
Like
am
in that
God.
look, I am God. I am telling you what to think. And then James puts his head down. I thought that was a really interesting point as well, and a character beat for David, just to further emphasize who he thinks he is in this role, the power that he has. But yeah, you're right. All of this happens. Obviously, we see Joel just manage to defend himself as well. He obviously like falls onto the guy and stabs him in the neck, like in the neck. Penicillin's work. Joel is slowly starting to come back around. He's managed to defend himself, thank God. I love as well, like in this episode, we kind of feel like Joel's back on his feet. It's starting to look like, especially the way the episode leads on later on with Joel, we think, oh, Joel's going to be the one who saves Ellie. And the point is that doesn't happen. Like Ellie's the one who saves herself and then bumps into Joel. And I like that misdirection here with the episode. But then, yeah, you're absolutely right, Joey. So then that happens, and then Ellie gets captured, right? So Ellie's carried back by David. We cut back to her in a cage, like David's watching over her very creepily. And then, he talks about how he admires her, right? And like all of this language that he's giving her, telling her how special she is, and now also emphasizing how special he should be to her. Like, I stopped the others from killing you. And Ellie's responses all the time is, fuck you, eat shit. She sees right through to him. She will not fall for this. And he keeps trying to offer her stuff all the time. Like, I will protect you. I will keep you alive. And he's like, look, if you stay here, I'll let go Joel. I'll let Joel go. I'll let Joel go and he'll be fine. He says, like, if you can't find a way to trust me, then you are alone. And I thought that was a really interesting line again, because, and again, we talk about that sense of trust, right? And he's kind of almost twisting what Maria's taught him about trust in her mind there, saying, you will end up alone if you don't trust me. Again, very narcissist of him to say that, like, put your trust, put your belief in me because I'm the savior who will save you. But also, we know how misplacing trust can also mean that you can end up alone.
Yeah, absolutely. We see David here really exploring more of that textbook narcissism, not just from his manipulative language, but because he's becoming infatuated with Ellie, and he
Yeah.
keeps repeating how Ellie reminds her of him.
Mm-hmm.
He's just so obsessed with himself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you're just
Yeah.
like me. You're special because I'm special.
Mm-hmm.
And look what we could do together. We're powerful. We're different because you're like me and I'm powerful and I'm different.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to have babies with you because I can't procreate with myself. So he's just so incredibly obsessed.
We then cut back to Joel. So then Joel's basically, he attacks the men with guns. He then gets them tied up. He starts torturing one. This is all from the video game. And then he's trying to find the location of Ellie, right? So he's got one tied up in the chair, the other one tied to the radiator. I like as well, we get this like reference back to that episode, about when he asked the couple that he met out into the woods. So he's like, you point at this location and your wife's already told me you point to the same location as your wife did. We get this again, obviously, in a much more brutal way. And this is a reminder of, Joel's done some shit before. Like, remember Tessa's line, we're not good people. Joel's done some shit before. He knows how to get information out of people when he needs to. Joel can be that brute when he needs to be. And right now, his priority is getting Ellie back in any way that he can. So, stabs the guy in the knee, gets the location, puts the knife in his mouth and asks him to point on the map. And then, straight away kills him. Just one straight away, knifing him dead. And the other guy's pleading with him, saying, "What did you do that for? Like, he told you the truth, he was helping you." And I just, again, Joel just doesn't care. Like, he's going to go and do what he needs to do. These people were going to kill him earlier on, and Joel understands that. And that's his way. Again, this is bringing it back to survival. Those guys need to die in order for Joel to get Ellie back. It's as simple as that. Stabs one of them, done. Joel now knows where the location is of the resort, and then he sets off. And then we come back to this, which is Ellie in the cage. Now, this is when she sees the human ear on the floor under the table, and she's like, just puts two and two together like that. She's like, oh my God, they're eating people. David straight away afterwards brings in food. She obviously kicks it away and says, like, you're eating people, you sick fucks. And she says, what you're going to do, you're going to chop me up into little pieces, which is a line lifted from the game and obviously comes back later on as well. David, again, it's the narcissism. I would have told you sooner. You judged me. Like, your friend took another man's life as well. He did that to defend you. I'm defending you right now. I'm the one who's keeping you alive. And then he has a really interesting conversation about cordyceps, right, Joey?
Yes. He basically says that it wasn't God that showed him enlightenment or revelation, but cordyceps. And he specifically says something I find really interesting, which is a thematic through line throughout the show so far. They understand survival, and he says cordyceps love, which I think is so interesting. But he describes the humanless ability of the cordyceps to grow, to expand, and that they will do anything, even violent actions, to see their species grow. And so he's mimicking his behavior after these cordyceps. And this idea of love, which we see in episode 1, which I brought up a few times now, at the breakfast table, how there's this friction of love and codependency. And we are talking a lot about trust in this episode. And when we put trust into people, and trust is kind of required for that codependency. And so trust, codependency, love become these blurred lines. And I think it was really smart, the mirroring here to the episode in which Tess becomes infected, because we see how the cordyceps kisses Tess, and that's more of a direct metaphor to this idea of love. And also we see David behaving very similarly with Ellie, that he wants to essentially procreate. He wants to create children. He wants to create his world. He wants to see himself rebuilt, the same way that the cordyceps want to see itself rebuilt. And so this kind of mirroring of Tess with the cordyceps kissing feels a lot like the way that he reaches into the cell to grab Ellie's hand. And of course, Ellie gives in. I love how she says, "Oh," which I thought was funny. And then she breaks his finger.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, like the whole point you brought up there, like the way that he sees cordyceps. And what's interesting is that cordyceps is an assault on the body, effectively. That's what it is. Like, it's taking away your humanity, right? And it's like assaulting the body and like, entering the body in that unwelcomed way. And yet what we see later on from David is an assault, so he is the cordyceps in the way that he sees it. He goes to assault Ellie. He goes to basically try and rape Ellie in that way, and it's interesting that kind of that view of that and how he kind of mirrors himself with the cordyceps, how he acts like it in a, he is a human, obviously uninfected at this point, but is very much acting in the way that it assaults and like enters the body in an unwelcomed way. And I thought that was a really interesting parallel with the way that he sees the cordyceps like that. But yeah, again, like I love Ellie's like reaction when she's like, "Oh," and like, puts his hands on her and he says, "Imagine the life we could build